The red sun cast long shadows across Neo Valora as Lemin secured the oxygen canister to his motorbike. Through the haze of toxic dust, he could make out the jagged skyline of the dead zone looming beyond the city's atmospheric barriers. His breath fogged the inside of his mask as he double-checked the pressure gauge on the canister, still at 85% capacity, enough to fetch a good price in the outer districts. Last run of the day, he muttered to himself, adjusting the straps of his worn respirator. The device had seen better days, its filters needing replacement soon. But oxygen tanks took priority over personal equipment. His sister needed them more than he needed comfort. Neo Valora in 2178 was a pale shadow of what cities once were. 60 years after the Great Cataclysm, that perfect storm of climate disasters, volcanic eruptions, and nuclear conflicts, the world's atmosphere had become a toxic soup. Clean oxygen had transformed from a birthright into a luxury commodity. And Lemin had become one of many oxygen merchants operating in the gray market between legality and survival. The outer districts sprawled beneath crumbling apartment blocks. Makeshift shelters clustered around oxygen pipelines, like barnacles on a ship's hull. Lemin navigated the narrow alleys with practiced ease, his modified bike humming quietly as it carried its precious cargo. The summer heat intensified the choking sensation beneath his mask, sweat trickling down his neck as he reached his destination. Old Vin's compound was marked only by faded blue paint on a concrete wall. Lemin knocked twice, then 3 times, the signal that had become second nature after months of deliveries. "You're late," Vin grumbled as he opened the reinforced door, ushering Lemin inside. The 42-year-old militia leader had deep wrinkles around his eyes, the only visible part of his face above his filter mask. "I was beginning to think you'd gotten caught in another toxic sandstorm." "Almost did," Lemin replied, wheeling the bike into the secured courtyard where a small group of Vin's people waited. "The warning sirens went off as I was leaving the central district. Had to take the tunnel route." Vin nodded, helping Lemin detach the canister. "Price is the same?" "Had to increase it by 10%, Lemin said apologetically. "Authority checkpoints have doubled this week. Had to bribe my way through twice." A murmur of discontent rippled through the small crowd, but Vin silenced them with a raised hand. "Still cheaper than official channels," he reminded them. "At least Lemin doesn't charge us triple market rate like the authority suppliers." As Lemin completed the transaction, a young man pushed through the crowd, his face mask hanging loosely around his neck, a dangerous practice in the marginal air quality of the outer districts. "Tran, mask up!" Vin barked. "You want to damage your lungs even more?" The 24-year-old volunteer sheepishly pulled his mask back into place. "Sorry, boss. But you all need to hear this. There's been an attack on the relief convoy from the coastal settlements. Oxygen thieves hit them at the eastern checkpoint." Lemin felt his chest tighten. "When?" "Less than an hour ago," Tran replied. "They took everything: medical supplies, food rations, and nearly 50 oxygen canisters meant for the hospital district." The news hit Lemin like a physical blow. His sister Lam was in that hospital district, her congenital respiratory condition requiring constant oxygen supplementation. The stockpile he'd carefully built up for her would last another 3 days at most. "Any word on who led the raid?" Vin asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Tran shook his head. "Same as always. Organized, well-armed. Knew exactly when the convoy would arrive. Must have someone on the inside." Lemin pocketed the payment chips and turned to leave. "I need to check on my sister," he said, his voice tight with worry. "Be careful," Vin warned. "The authority patrols are looking for someone to blame. They'll target independent suppliers first. Always do." As Lemin guided his bike back into the maze of alleyways, his mind raced. The oxygen thieves had been a growing problem for months, no longer just desperate scavengers, but a coordinated force disrupting official supply lines. Some in the outer districts considered them heroes, redistributing resources to the poorest sectors. But Lemin had seen the aftermath of their raids: emptied medical facilities, children gasping for breath, the elderly left to suffocate. The hospital district loomed ahead, its air scrubbers working overtime to maintain breathable conditions. Lemin parked his bike in a secured lot and hurried through the sterilization chamber before entering the medical facility. Lam's room was on the third floor, in the respiratory care unit. At 16, she looked even younger, her slight frame diminished by the medical equipment surrounding her bed. The oxygen mask covered half her face, but her eyes brightened when she saw her brother. "You're early today," she said, her voice muffled by the mask. Lemin forced a smile. "Finished my rounds ahead of schedule." He checked the monitor displaying her oxygen levels, lower than yesterday, but still within acceptable parameters. "How are you feeling?" "Same as always," Lam said with a weak attempt at humor. "Like I'm breathing through a straw." She paused, studying her brother's face. "What's wrong?" "You have that worried look." Lemin considered lying, but knew his sister would see through it. "The relief convoy was hit today, the one bringing supplies from the coast." Lam's eyes widened. "The oxygen thieves again?" He nodded, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I've got enough stored for you for 3 days. Maybe 4 if we're careful. By then, the authorities should have redistributed new supplies." "At triple the price," Lam said bitterly. "We can't afford that, Min. Not with what they're charging now." "Let me worry about that," he replied, squeezing her hand. "You focus on getting stronger." A series of coughs racked her small body, and Lemin adjusted her oxygen flow, increasing it slightly. The hospital supply would cover her for tonight, but tomorrow he'd need to bring in his own reserves. As he watched his sister fighting for every breath, something hardened inside him. The oxygen thieves had crossed a line. This wasn't just about survival anymore. They were threatening his sister's life, and Lemin wasn't going to wait for the authorities' ineffectual response. "Get some rest," he told Lam. "I'll be back in the morning with more oxygen." She caught his wrist. "Be careful, brother. Whatever you're planning, remember, you can't help me if you're dead." Lemin nodded, but his mind was already mapping routes into the dead zone, where rumors placed the thieves' main base. He'd need better equipment, a sealed vehicle, and information, the kind that wouldn't come cheap in Neo-Valora. Night fell over the city, but sleep eluded Lemin. In his small apartment, he spread out maps of the dead zone's periphery on his table, marking potential hideouts and traversable routes. The dead zone, that vast wasteland of abandoned cities and toxic clouds, was not a place anyone entered lightly. Most who ventured beyond the atmospheric barriers never returned, their bodies adding to the millions already claimed by the poisoned air. But Lemin had something most didn't: knowledge of the old air filtration systems. Before becoming an oxygen merchant, he'd been an engineer at the Clean Air Institute, working on developing smaller, more efficient air filters before the project was shut down due to budget constraints. A convenient excuse when the authority realized decentralized air purification would threaten their control of the oxygen supply. A knock at his door interrupted his planning. Hand moving to the knife at his belt, Lemin approached cautiously. "Who is it?" he called. "Someone with information about today's raid," came the response. "Thatch sent me." The name of his old colleague from the Institute gave Lemin pause. He hadn't spoken to Thatch in months, not since the man had taken a position with the Oxygen Authority after the Institute's closure. Lemin opened the door to find a hooded figure, face obscured by an advanced filtration mask, the kind only Authority employees could afford. The visitor pushed past him into the apartment. "You shouldn't be planning solo excursions into the dead zone," the figure said, pulling back their hood to reveal Thatch himself. At 29, his former colleague looked aged beyond his years, dark circles under his eyes and a nervous twitch to his movements. "How did you know what I was planning?" Lemin demanded. Thatch gestured to the maps. Because it's what I'd do if my sister were in the hospital when those bastards hit the convoy. He removed his mask, revealing a face gaunt with stress. I still have access to authority surveillance. I saw you at the hospital. Saw your face when you heard about the raid. I know you. Min. You're going after them. Min crossed his arms. And why would an authority man care about my plans? Because I know who's behind the oxygen thieves. Thatch's voice dropped to a whisper. And it's not who you think. The revelation hung in the air between them. Min studied his former colleague, searching for signs of deception. Who, then? He finally asked. Not here, Thatch replied, glancing nervously at the windows. The walls have ears in this district. Meet me tomorrow at the old compressor station. Sub-level 3. Midnight. Bring whatever equipment you were planning to take into the dead zone. You'll need it. Before Min could ask more questions, Thatch replaced his mask and slipped out the door, leaving only a lingering sense of unease behind. Dawn brought another toxic sandstorm, the siren's wail echoing through Neo-Valora's canyons of crumbling buildings. Min watched from his window as residents scurried for shelter, sealing doors and windows against the poisonous dust. The storm would delay his visit to Lam, but it also provided cover for his preparations. In a hidden compartment beneath his floorboards, Min retrieved the equipment he'd salvaged from the Institute before its closure. An experimental personal air filter, more efficient than standard models, a handheld atmospheric analyzer, and most precious of all, a data chip containing the schematics for the Institute's prototype portable air purification system. By midday, the storm had subsided enough for travel. Min loaded a fresh oxygen canister onto his bike and made his way to the hospital, weaving through streets still hazy with toxic particles. The hospital's air filtration systems labored under the additional strain, the quality indicator showing yellow warning levels. Lam was awake but weaker than the day before, her breathing more labored. The storm made everything worse, she explained between shallow breaths. They had to divert oxygen from our ward to emergency services. Min quickly replaced her hospital supply with his own canister, adjusting the flow rate. This should last until tomorrow, he said, checking the connections. I've got one more full tank at home. And after that? Lam asked, her eyes full of unspoken fear. I'm working on a solution, he assured her, unwilling to share his dangerous plans. Lam wasn't fooled. You're going after them, aren't you, the thieves? When he didn't immediately deny it, she grabbed his hand with surprising strength. Don't be stupid. Min, they're organized, armed. You're just one person. I might have help, he said, thinking of Thatch's mysterious offer. And I have something they don't. Knowledge of the old air systems. Knowledge won't stop a bullet, Lam countered. She reached beneath her pillow and pulled out a small device, no larger than a coin. At least take this. I've been working on it with Dr. Yen when she visits. Min took the device, examining it closely. It appeared to be a modified version of the Institute's air quality sensors, but with additional components he didn't recognize. What is it? A catalyst accelerator, Lam explained. Dr. Yen helped me design it based on your old notes. It can temporarily boost the efficiency of any oxygen filtration system by about 40%. One-time use only, though. Min stared at his sister in amazement. Despite her condition, she'd been applying her mind to the same problems that had occupied him at the Institute. When did you become an engineer? A ghost of a smile crossed her pale face. I had a good teacher, and lots of time stuck in hospital beds. He carefully pocketed the device. Thank you. This could be more valuable than you know. Just come back alive, she whispered. Promise me. I promise, he said, knowing it might be a vow he couldn't keep. As night fell over Neo-Valora, Min prepared for his meeting with Thatch. He modified his motorbike's engine to run more efficiently in the toxic air and reinforced the sealed cabin attachment, a transparent dome that would protect him from the worst of the dead zone's atmosphere. The cabin wouldn't last long in the heart of the zone, but it might give him enough time to reach the thieves' hideout. The old compressor station sat at the edge of the industrial sector, a massive concrete structure that had once pumped purified air throughout the eastern districts. Now, it stood abandoned, its machinery cannibalized for parts, its underground levels home to the desperate and the dangerous. Lemin approached cautiously, the atmospheric analyzer in his hand showing dangerously high toxicity levels, even here within the city's barriers. Sub-level 3 required navigating a maze of corridors, littered with debris and the occasional skeleton, grim reminders of those who'd sought shelter here during the early days of the catastrophe. Thatch was waiting in what had once been the main control room, surrounded by dead monitors and rusted control panels. Two armed figures stood beside him, their faces obscured by military-grade respirators. "You came," Thatch said, sounding almost surprised. "I wasn't sure you would." "You said you know who's behind the thieves," Lemin replied, keeping his distance. "I'm listening." Thatch gestured to the armed figures. "These are friends. They're with a resistance group that's been tracking the thieves' operations." "Resistance against what?" Lemin asked, skeptically. "Against the people who are actually running this city," one of the armed figures said, a woman's voice muffled by her mask. "The same people who shut down your institute when you got too close to developing decentralized air purification." Lemin's eyes narrowed. "The Oxygen Authority." Thatch nodded. "Not the whole authority. A faction within it, led by Deputy Director Hasingan." The name hit Lemin like a physical blow. Hasingan had been a senior official at the Institute, outwardly supportive of their research while secretly reporting to the authority. When the Institute was shut down, he'd been promoted to his current position overseeing oxygen distribution to the poorer districts. "Ngan is behind the oxygen thieves?" Lemin asked incredulously. "Why would an authority official steal his own supplies?" "Control," Thatch explained. "The official narrative is that oxygen is scarce, justifying the exorbitant prices. But it's not as scarce as they claim. Ngan orchestrates these raids, hoarding the stolen oxygen in secret warehouses, then sells it back to desperate citizens through his network of black market dealers." "He creates the shortage, then profits from it," the female fighter added. "And the authority allows this?" Lemin demanded. "They're complicit," Thatch said bitterly. "The city police force is on Ngan's payroll. Anyone who speaks out disappears into the dead zone." Lemin processed this information, his mind racing. "If what you're saying is true, why tell me? What can one former engineer do against the entire authority?" Thatch exchanged glances with his armed companions. "Because you know the old oxygen systems better than anyone. And because we've located Ngan's main warehouse. It's in an underground compression facility beneath the dead zone. We need someone who can navigate the old air tunnels to get us inside." "And then what?" "We expose Ngan's operation, release the hoarded oxygen to the people, and use the evidence to force reforms in the authority." Thatch said. It sounded noble, but suspiciously simple. "You're asking me to guide you into the dead zone, into a heavily guarded facility, to steal back stolen oxygen." "To save your sister," Thatch countered. "And thousands like her. The hospital district will run out of oxygen in 3 days without the relief convoy's supplies. How long will Lam last after that?" The mention of his sister sent a chill through Lemin. "How do I know this isn't a trap? That you're not working for Ngan?" "Because I lost my family to his policies," the female fighter said, removing her mask to reveal a face scarred by chemical burns. "My children suffocated when the authority cut off our district's oxygen supply after we couldn't pay their increased rates. I'm Thi, by the way. Former doctor before the hospital in Sector 7 was shut down." Lemin studied her face, seeing only raw pain and determination. He turned back to Thatch. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow night," Thatch replied. "The toxic sandstorms are forecast to be at their weakest. We'll use the old maintenance tunnels to reach the edge of the dead zone. Then take sealed vehicles the rest of the way. I need to ensure my sister has enough oxygen before I go, Lemin insisted. Already arranged, Thatch said. Dr. Yen will personally oversee her care while we're gone. She's part of our network. The pieces were falling into place too neatly, raising Lemin's suspicions. But with Lam's life on the line and his own oxygen reserves dwindling, he had little choice. I'll meet you here tomorrow night, he agreed. But I'm bringing my own equipment and vehicle. And if I sense a trap, I'm out. Thatch nodded. Fair enough. Just remember, this might be your only chance to save your sister and strike back at the system that's been slowly killing both of you. As Lemin navigated back through Neo Valora's darkened streets, the weight of his decision pressed down on him. He was committing to an expedition into the dead zone, a near-suicide mission, based on information from a former colleague he barely trusted. But the alternative was watching Lam slowly suffocate as the city's oxygen supplies dwindled. Back in his apartment, Lemin made final modifications to his sealed bike cabin, reinforcing the joints and installing the experimental air filter he'd salvaged from the Institute. If Thatch's information was accurate, they'd be traveling through the heart of the dead zone, where even the most advanced breathing apparatus could fail within hours. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of gasping for breath in an endless wasteland of rust and ash. Morning brought news that confirmed Thatch's predictions. The authority announced temporary rationing of oxygen in all districts due to the unfortunate loss of the relief convoy. Prices in the official market immediately doubled, pushing even more citizens toward the black market. At the hospital, Dr. Yen was checking Lam's vitals when Lemin arrived. The 50-year-old physician had been treating Lam since childhood, her dedication unwavering, even as the healthcare system crumbled around her. Your timing is good, she said, gesturing for Lemin to join her in the corridor outside Lam's room. I need to speak with you privately. Once they were alone, her professional demeanor gave way to urgent concern. Thatch told me about your plans. Are you certain you want to do this? You're part of their network, Lemin observed. Why didn't you ever tell me? Dr. Yen sighed, the lines around her eyes deepening. Because involving you meant putting you at risk. You had Lam to think about. She lowered her voice further. I've been documenting the effects of the authorities' oxygen policies for years. The shortages always occur in the poorest districts first. Always, after residents protest price increases. And Hasingan is behind it all? Lemin asked. She nodded grimly. He was once idealistic, believe it or not. Wanted to ensure fair distribution to all citizens. But power corrupts, and controlling something people literally can't live without. She trailed off. The oxygen thieves were his creation, initially to redistribute supplies to overlooked districts. Now, they're his personal enforcers and profit center. How do I know I can trust you, or Thatch? Lemin pressed. Dr. Yen reached into her pocket and withdrew a small oxygen filter, identical to the prototype Lemin had helped design at the Institute before it was supposedly destroyed. Because I never stopped believing in your work, she said. These small filters could decentralize oxygen purification, break the authorities' monopoly. Thatch smuggled out the designs when the Institute closed. We've been refining them in secret. Lemin took the filter, examining the improvements they'd made to his original design. It's not enough for mass production. No, she agreed. But it's a start. And if we can expose Nan's warehouse, prove the artificial nature of the shortages. She placed a hand on his arm. I'll watch over Lam while you're gone. Her oxygen supply is guaranteed. Lemin nodded, a plan forming in his mind. I need access to the Institute's old server room. There's equipment there I can use. It's under authority control now, Dr. Yen warned. I still have my access codes, if they haven't changed the security protocols. It's too risky, she insisted. More risky than traveling into the dead zone, he countered. If I'm going to do this, I need every advantage. Dr. Yen hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. I'll create a diversion at the main entrance. You'll have maybe 10 minutes. Lemin spent a precious hour with Lam, not telling her of his imminent departure but memorizing every detail of her face. Just in case. She was sleeping when he finally left, her breathing steadier thanks to the oxygen canister he'd brought. The institute stood in the administrative district, its once gleaming facade now dulled by years of toxic dust storms. As promised, Dr. Yen created a distraction, a medical emergency requiring immediate attention from the security staff at the main entrance. Lemin slipped in through a service entrance, using his old access codes to bypass the first layer of security. The server room was in the basement, its climate-controlled environment preserving the delicate equipment inside. Lemin worked quickly, downloading old schematics of the tunnel systems connecting the city to the outlying compression facilities, including the one beneath the dead zone where Non supposedly stored his stolen oxygen. He was about to leave when a file caught his eye. Project Revitalize, the air purification system he'd been developing before the Institute's closure. The project files had been updated recently, suggesting someone was continuing his work. Lemin copied these files as well, before slipping back out of the building. Night fell, and Lemin made his final preparations. He visited Vin in the outer district, exchanging his remaining oxygen canister for ammunition and emergency supplies. The dead zone? Vin asked incredulously when Lemin explained a portion of his plan. You're either very brave or very stupid, my friend. Probably both, Lemin admitted. But my sister needs that oxygen, and so do your people. Vun studied him thoughtfully. The thieves have been growing bolder. My scouts report increased activity near the eastern barrier. Whatever you're planning, you're not the only one making moves tonight. Then I'd better move quickly, Lemin said, securing the last of his supplies. Vun clasped his shoulder. If you make it back, there will always be a place for you in our compound. The old compressor station loomed like a concrete ghost as Lemin approached on his modified bike. Thatch was waiting with 4 others, all equipped with sealed environment suits and weapons. I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind, Thatch said as Lemin dismounted. Had some preparations to make, Lemin replied, not mentioning his visit to the Institute. This is everyone. Thatch nodded. A small team can move faster, attract less attention. He introduced the others. Thai, the doctor he'd met yesterday. Dao, a former authority engineer. Quan and Lin, siblings who'd lost their parents to oxygen rationing. Our transport is in the tunnel, Thatch continued, leading them through the compressor station to a hidden access point. The maintenance passage will take us beneath the atmospheric barrier. Then, we surface on the other side. The tunnel was barely tall enough to stand in, its walls slick with condensation from the temperature difference between the city and the dead zone beyond. Lemin's bike fit through with centimeters to spare, its sealed cabin, their emergency backup if the main transport failed. Beyond the first bend waited their primary vehicle, a heavy transport truck modified with reinforced air seals and external oxygen scrubbers. It looked military-grade, raising further questions in Lemin's mind about exactly who Thatch was working with. Authority surplus, Thatch explained, noting Lemin's expression. Repurposed from vehicles they abandoned when the western districts fell to the dead zone. The tunnel journey took nearly 2 hours, the ancient passage occasionally requiring them to clear debris or bypass collapsed sections. Finally, they reached a heavy steel door marked with faded hazard symbols. Beyond this point, we're in the dead zone proper, Thatch warned. Oxygen content is below 5%, and toxicity levels are extreme. Full masks and sealed suits at all times. If your equipment fails, signal immediately. We'll have seconds, not minutes, to help you. Lemin activated his experimental air filter, feeling the rush of purified air against his face. The filter, would consume itself in the process of cleaning the toxic atmosphere, giving him perhaps 4 hours of protection before he'd need to switch to his backup system. The heavy door groaned open, revealing a world Lemin had only seen in historical footage. Buildings stood like skeletal sentinels, their surfaces corroded by decades of chemical rain and toxic winds. The ground was a wasteland of metallic dust and ash, swirling in patterns that suggested the presence of unnatural air currents. Most striking was the sky, a churning mass of yellow-gray clouds lit from within by occasional flashes of chemical lightning. No stars were visible. No moon penetrated the poisonous canopy that had claimed millions of lives during the Great Cataclysm. Atmospheric analyzer shows multiple toxins, Dow reported, checking his instruments. Sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, particulate metal compounds. Air is unbreathable. The warehouse is 15 kilometers northeast, Thatch said, consulting a digital map. We follow the old highway until the split, then take the tunnel beneath the former financial district. The transport truck moved slowly through the ruined landscape, its reinforced tires crunching over debris. Lemin followed on his bike, the sealed cabin providing an extra layer of protection against the deadly atmosphere. They had traveled perhaps 5 kilometers when the first complications arose. A toxic sandstorm appeared on the horizon, moving toward them with alarming speed. "We need shelter," Thatch called over the communication system. "These vehicles aren't rated for direct storm exposure." Lemin consulted the schematics he'd downloaded from the Institute. "There's an underground parking structure 2 kilometers ahead. Reinforced concrete. Multiple levels. Should withstand the storm." They increased speed, racing against the approaching wall of poisonous dust. The storm gained on them, its leading edge already reducing visibility to mere meters. As the first particles began striking their vehicles, they located the entrance to the parking structure, partially collapsed but still accessible. The transport truck barely cleared the entrance, its sides scraping against concrete pillars as Thatch maneuvered it into the relative safety of the underground structure. Lemin's smaller bike followed more easily, but not before the sealed cabin took several impacts from debris carried by the storm's winds. "Cabin integrity at 82%, Lemin reported, checking the readouts on his control panel. "No immediate danger, but I'll need to make repairs before we leave." Inside the structure, they activated emergency lighting, revealing a cavernous space filled with the rusted hulks of pre-cataclysm vehicles. More disturbingly, mummified remains were visible in some of them, people who had sought shelter from the initial toxic clouds, only to be trapped as the atmosphere became permanently unbreathable. "Storm tracking suggests we'll be here at least 3 hours, Dow announced, checking atmospheric readings. "Possibly longer if it stalls over this area." "We use the time to rest and check equipment," Thatch decided. "Quan, Lin, secure the perimeter. Make sure there are no surprises waiting for us." As the siblings moved to patrol the structure's inner boundaries, Lemin took the opportunity to examine the damage to his bike's cabin. The seals had held, but hairline cracks were visible in the transparent dome. Nothing he couldn't repair with the sealant he'd brought, but a worrying reminder of their vulnerability. Thai approached as he worked, her medical scanner humming as she checked his vital signs. "Your experimental filter is working better than expected," she observed. "Oxygen saturation at 97%. No detectable toxins in your bloodstream." "It's still consuming itself too quickly," Lemin replied, showing her the indicator on the filter's housing. 3 hours left, maybe less." "We all have backup systems," she reminded him. "And the warehouse isn't far. According to our intelligence, it has functioning air purification." Lemin paused in his repairs. "That's what I don't understand. Why store stolen oxygen in the dead zone? The risk, the logistics. It doesn't make sense." Thai glanced toward Thatch, who was deep in conversation with Dow. "It's not just a warehouse," she said quietly. "It's a fully operational compression facility. Ngan isn't just stealing oxygen. He's producing it out here, away from authority oversight. That's impossible, Lemin objected. The air is too toxic for conventional filtration. Unless he has something unconventional, Thie suggested. Something like your institute was developing before it was shut down. The implication sent a chill through Lemin. You think Ngan stole our research? That's why the institute was closed? Thie nodded. Thatch believes so. The facility we're heading to was originally built as an emergency backup for Neo-Valora's air supply. When the dead zone expanded, it was supposedly abandoned. But satellite imagery shows energy signatures consistent with large-scale air processing. Lemin thought of the Project Revitalize files he'd found updated in the Institute's server room. If Ngan had continued developing his air purification system in secret, using it to produce oxygen while maintaining the fiction of scarcity. The whole system is built on a lie, he murmured. A lie that's killing people like your sister every day, Thie agreed. That's why we need to expose it, whatever the cost. The storm raged above them for nearly 4 hours, its howling winds occasionally penetrating to their underground shelter. When it finally passed, they emerged to a landscape transformed. Dunes of toxic dust had formed around buildings, and the highway they'd been following was barely visible. We'll need to rely on GPS now, Thatch said, programming new coordinates into the transport's navigation system. Stay close. Lemin, visibility is minimal. They resumed their journey, moving more slowly through the altered terrain. Lemin noticed something troubling. His atmospheric analyzer was showing increasing concentrations of a chemical compound not typically found in the dead zone, methyl isocyanate, a highly toxic industrial chemical. Are we approaching a former industrial area? He asked over the comm system. Dow checked his maps. Negative. This area was residential before the cataclysm. I'm picking up methyl isocyanate concentrations, Lemin reported, increasing as we move northeast. A tense silence followed this announcement. Methyl isocyanate was not a natural component of the dead zone's atmosphere. It was a manufactured chemical, suggesting human activity nearby. Could be leakage from old industrial containers, Thatch suggested. The dead zone is full of ruptured storage tanks. Concentrations are too consistent for leakage, Lemin countered. This is active release. Before they could discuss further, Lin's voice came urgently over the comm. Vehicle signatures ahead, multiple heat sources, moving in formation. Thatch immediately dimmed the transport's lights. Kill engines, everyone, silent mode. Lemin powered down his bike, activating only the minimal life support systems for his cabin. Through the swirling dust, shadowy forms became visible, a convoy of vehicles moving perpendicular to their route, their designs distinctly military. Authority patrols? Quan whispered over the comm. No, Thatch replied grimly. Those are oxygen thieves. They're heading toward the city. Lemin counted at least 8 vehicles, all heavily armed and carrying what appeared to be large storage containers. They're transporting oxygen canisters, he observed. A lot of them. Another raid, Thie said bitterly. More shortages for Nan to profit from. They waited in tense silence until the convoy had passed, then cautiously resumed their journey. The methyl isocyanate concentrations continued to rise, suggesting they were approaching its source. After another hour of careful navigation, they crested a rise to see their destination in the valley below, a massive concrete structure partially buried in the earth, surrounded by security barriers and patrolled by armed guards. Unlike the dead buildings around it, this facility showed clear signs of activity. Lights glowed from reinforced windows, and exhaust plumes rose from ventilation shafts. Most telling were the storage tanks arrayed around the main building, large enough to hold thousands of cubic meters of compressed oxygen, and bearing the unmistakable insignia of the Oxygen Authority. There's our proof, Thatch said triumphantly. Ngan's secret operation, right in the heart of the dead zone. Lemin studied the facility through enhanced optics. Security is heavy. How do we get inside? Through the maintenance tunnels, Thatch replied, pointing to a smaller structure a few hundred meters from the main building. That's an access point for the underground network. According to our intelligence, it's minimally guarded. They don't expect threats from the dead zone. They concealed their vehicles in the ruins of a collapsed building and proceeded on foot, moving cautiously through the toxic landscape. Lemin checked his filter. Less than 2 hours of operational life remaining before he'd need to switch to his backup system. The access point was indeed lightly guarded. A single sentry who was easily neutralized by Quan's silent approach and quick hands. Inside, they found a pressurized chamber leading to a network of maintenance tunnels. The air quality noticeably improved once the outer door sealed behind them. "We can remove masks here," Dow confirmed after checking the atmosphere. "Oxygen levels sufficient for breathing. Minimal toxins." Lemin took a cautious breath of the tunnel air. It tasted flat and processed, but was indeed breathable. Further confirmation that the facility was actively purifying the dead zone's atmosphere. Thatch consulted a schematic similar to the one Lemin had downloaded from the Institute. Main compression chamber is 2 levels down. That's where we'll find Ngan's operation center and the controls for the storage tanks. "And Ngan himself?" Lemin asked. "According to our intelligence, he personally oversees major shipments. With the convoy we saw heading toward the city, he should be here." They moved through the tunnels silently, encountering only a few maintenance workers who were quickly subdued and restrained. The lack of security inside the facility suggested overconfidence. Who would risk traveling through the dead zone to attack a secret installation? As they descended to the lower levels, the ambient noise increased. The hum of massive machinery, the hiss of pressurized gases. They were approaching the heart of the operation. The main compression chamber was a vast space filled with industrial equipment, air purification systems, compression machinery, storage tanks in various stages of filling. Workers in authority uniforms moved among the equipment, monitoring gauges and adjusting settings. And there, on an elevated platform overlooking the operation, stood Ngan himself. At 35, the deputy director had the bearing of a man accustomed to power. His pristine uniform and polished breathing apparatus contrasting sharply with the utilitarian equipment of the workers below. "There's our target," Thatch whispered, pointing to a control room adjacent to the main chamber. "That's where we can access the system controls and communications network. We expose the operation, release the oxygen reserves to the city, and capture Ngan for public trial." Lemin studied the layout, noting security positions and potential escape routes. "How do we get to the control room without raising the alarm?" "Maintenance uniforms," Thai suggested, pointing to a storage locker near their position. "We walk in like we belong there." The plan worked initially. Dressed in worker uniforms with breathing apparatus concealing their faces, they moved through the compression chamber toward the control room. Lemin marveled at the technology surrounding them, much of it based on his own research at the Institute, but developed far beyond what he'd thought possible with current resources. They were within 20 meters of the control room when a security alert sounded. On the platform above, Ngan looked up sharply, his gaze scanning the chamber floor. "We've been made," Thatch hissed. "Move now." They abandoned stealth, sprinting toward the control room as security personnel converged from multiple directions. Quan and Lin provided covering fire, their weapons set to non-lethal rounds that would incapacitate without risking damage to the sensitive equipment. Lemin and Thatch reached the control room first, securing the door behind them as Dow worked to override the security systems. Thai took up a defensive position at the windows, monitoring the chaos erupting in the main chamber. "I need 3 minutes to access the main controls," Dow said, his fingers flying over the interface. "We may not have 3 minutes," Thai warned, as armed security forces began organizing a coordinated approach to the control room. Lemin examined the control systems, recognizing components from his Institute designs. The air purification system. It's a developed version of Project Revitalize. "Focus, Min," Thatch urged. We need to expose this operation now, before reinforcements arrive. Outside, the security forces had surrounded the control room. Through the reinforced windows, Lemin could see Ngan directing the operation, his face a mask of cold fury. "System accessed," Dao announced triumphantly. "I have control of communications and the oxygen release valves." "Open a channel to Neo-Valora Central," Thatch ordered. "Broadcast everything we see. Then release the oxygen reserves to all districts equally." As Dao worked to establish the broadcast, the first impacts struck the control room door, security attempting to breach their position. Quan and Lin had been captured, visible on the chamber floor being restrained by guards. "Broadcast active," Dao reported. "Neo-Valora is seeing everything." Thatch moved to the main camera, his voice steady as he addressed the city. "Citizens of Neo-Valora, this is the truth your authority has hidden from you. The oxygen shortages are artificial, created by Deputy Director Hasingan to control prices and maintain power. This facility in the dead zone produces clean oxygen in abundance, while you suffocate in rationed air." On the chamber floor, Ngan's face contorted with rage. He grabbed a communication device, his voice booming through the facility's speaker system. "Cut that broadcast immediately," he commanded. "This is a restricted authority installation. These are terrorists threatening our city's oxygen supply." Lemin stepped into camera view alongside Thatch. "I am Engineer Lemin, formerly of the Clean Air Institute. This facility is using technology developed for public benefit, perverted for private profit. The oxygen thieves raiding your convoys work for Deputy Director Ngan, creating artificial scarcity, while people die from lack of air." The control room door began to buckle under sustained assault. They had minutes at most before security breached their position. "Oxygen valves opening," Dao announced, executing the final part of their plan. "Reserves releasing to all city districts simultaneously." On the monitoring screens, they could see the massive storage tanks beginning to vent their contents into the main distribution system, enough oxygen to supply the entire city for weeks. The door gave way with a screech of tearing metal. Security forces poured into the control room, weapons raised. Lemin found himself staring down the barrel of a gun held by none other than Hasingan himself. "You have no idea what you've done," Ngan snarled. "The system exists as it does for a reason. The masses must be controlled, their consumption regulated. Without scarcity, there is no value, no control. Without air, there is no life," Lemin countered. "You've let people die for profit and power." Nagan's laugh was hollow. "Profit? You think this is about money? This is about the survival of humanity. The atmosphere is dying. In 50 years, the entire planet will be a dead zone unless consumption is strictly controlled. The few must be sacrificed for the many." Before Lemin could respond, the facility's emergency alarms activated, a different tone from the security alert. "System breach," an automated voice announced. "Atmospheric containment failing. Toxic infiltration imminent." Confusion spread through the security forces. Nagan's expression shifted from triumph to concern. "What have you done to my facility?" "Nothing," Thatch said, looking equally puzzled. "We only opened the oxygen valves." Lemin checked the monitoring systems. "Something's overriding the air purification controls. The system is reverse cycling, pulling dead zone atmosphere into the facility instead of filtering it." Panic erupted as toxic air began seeping into the compression chamber. Workers abandoned their posts, rushing for emergency breathing apparatus and evacuation routes. Security forces wavered, torn between maintaining their positions and self-preservation. "Fix it!" Ngan demanded, grabbing Lemin's collar. "You designed these systems. Reverse the cycle." "I can't," Lemin admitted after examining the controls. "It's being controlled externally. Someone else has hacked the system." The toxic air spread rapidly through the lower levels of the facility. Emergency seals activated automatically, trapping them in the increasingly poisonous environment. Security forces abandoned their prisoners, joining the general evacuation. In the confusion, Lemin noticed something on one of the monitoring screens. A familiar face entering the facility through the same maintenance tunnel they had used. It was Lam, accompanied by Dr. Yen and several others carrying medical equipment. "My sister," he gasped. "She's here in the facility." "Impossible," Thatch said, checking the screen. "She's supposed to be in the hospital." Lemin's blood ran cold as realization dawned. "You never arranged protection for her. That was a lie to get me here." Before Thatch could respond, a new voice came over the facility's communication system. Lam's voice, strained but determined. "Brother, can you hear me? We're in the maintenance section. Dr. Yen brought me here when the hospital started receiving oxygen from this facility. We knew something had happened." "Lam, the facility is compromised," Lemin replied urgently. "Toxic air is entering the system. You need to evacuate immediately." "We can't," Dr. Yen's voice replied. "The emergency seals have activated. We're trapped in the maintenance section with several patients we evacuated from the hospital." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Toxic levels in the compression chamber were approaching dangerous thresholds. Ngan and his security forces had retreated to higher levels, abandoning Lemin and his companions to their fate. "There must be an override," Thai insisted, searching the control systems. "A way to purge the toxic air and restore filtration." Lemin thought quickly, recalling the schematics of his original design. The primary filtration array. It has a manual override in the maintenance section, if Lam and Dr. Yen can reach it. He established communication with his sister, guiding her through the maintenance tunnels toward the filtration controls. Meanwhile, Dao worked to slow the toxic infiltration, buying precious minutes for their survival. "We've found it," Lam reported finally. "The filtration array control panel. What do we do?" Lemin provided detailed instructions, his engineering knowledge proving vital as Lam and Dr. Yen worked to reset the system. In the compression chamber, Lemin and his companions donned emergency breathing apparatus as the toxic levels approached lethal concentrations. "One more sequence," Lemin instructed his sister. "Initiate catalyst acceleration on my mark." "Catalyst acceleration?" Lam asked. "Like the device I gave you?" "Exactly," Lemin confirmed. "The system has a built-in version. It will temporarily boost filtration efficiency, giving us time to restore normal operations." As Lam prepared to execute the final command, security alarms blared again. On the monitoring screens, Lemin could see Ngan and a squad of armed guards approaching the maintenance section where Lam and Dr. Yen worked. "Lam, hurry," he urged. "You have company coming." "Almost there," she replied. Her breathing labored even through the communication system. The strain of the toxic environment was clearly affecting her already compromised lungs. Lemin made a desperate decision, removing the small catalyst device Lam had given him earlier. He connected it to the control room's auxiliary input. "Dao, route power to the auxiliary system," he ordered. "We're going to boost the filter from here." "It won't be enough to clear the whole facility," Dao warned. "It doesn't need to be," Lemin replied. "Just enough to give Lam time to activate the main catalyst." They activated the small device, watching as it consumed itself in a brief flash of energy. On the atmospheric monitors, they saw a momentary improvement, toxic levels dropping slightly in their immediate area. "It's working!" Thea exclaimed. "Toxicity dropping by 15% and holding—" "Not enough for long-term survival," Lemin noted grimly. "But it might buy us the minutes we need." In the maintenance section, Lam completed the activation sequence, just as Ngan and his guards arrived. Through the monitoring system, Lemin watched in horror as his sister collapsed. The strain of the toxic environment too much for her weakened lungs. Dr. Yen moved to protect her, facing Ngan with defiant courage. "The system is resetting," she announced. "In moments, this facility will be pumping clean oxygen to every district in Neo Valora, as it was always meant to do. Nan raised his weapon, his face contorted with rage. "You don't understand what you've done. The system cannot support unrestricted oxygen distribution. The infrastructure will fail within days." "Then we'll build better infrastructure," Dr. Yen replied calmly. "One that serves all people, not just those who can pay your extortion prices." Before Nan could respond, the primary filtration system roared to life, its powerful machinery reversing the toxic flow. Clean, purified air began flooding through the facility, pushing back the poisonous atmosphere that had threatened to kill them all. In the control room, Lemin and his companions watched the atmospheric monitors with growing hope as toxicity levels plummeted across the facility. "She did it," Thatch whispered. "Your sister saved us all." Lemin was already moving, racing through the now breathable corridors toward the maintenance section. He arrived to find Dr. Yen tending to Lam, her medical skills keeping his sister alive, despite her exposure to the toxic air. More surprisingly, he found Nan and his guards disarmed, not by force, but by the sudden arrival of authority officials who had seen the broadcast and arrived to investigate. "Deputy Director Hasingan," announced the lead official, "you are relieved of duty pending investigation into oxygen supply manipulation and resource hoarding." Gan's face was a mask of cold fury as he was led away. "You've doomed us all," he called back to Lemin. "The atmosphere is dying faster than you know. Without controlled rationing, we'll run out of air within a generation. Then we'll find a better solution together," Lemin replied. "One that doesn't sacrifice the vulnerable for the privileged." Lemin knelt beside his sister, taking her hand. Lam's eyes fluttered open, her breathing still labored but steadier as the room's atmosphere continued to improve. "Did it work?" she whispered. "Better than we could have hoped," he assured her. "The whole city is receiving oxygen from this facility now. No more shortages, no more rationing. At least until we find a more permanent solution," Dr. Yen cautioned. "This facility alone can't sustain Neo-Valora indefinitely." Lemin nodded, already thinking of the Project Revitalize files he'd downloaded from the Institute. "We'll build smaller, distributed purification systems. Break the centralized control model entirely." As emergency medical teams arrived to evacuate the injured, Lemin found Thatch standing apart from the others, his expression unreadable. "You knew about this facility all along," Lemin accused quietly. "You worked for Nhan before joining the resistance." Thatch didn't deny it. "I believed in his vision once. Controlled distribution seemed like the only way to manage dwindling resources." He sighed heavily. "It wasn't until I saw the hospital wards filled with people dying from shortages that I realized the true cost of his system." "And using my sister as bait to get me here?" "That wasn't the plan," Thatch insisted. "She was supposed to remain safely in the hospital. Dr. Yen bringing her here was unexpected." Lemin wasn't sure he believed him, but at the moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Lam was alive. The city was receiving the oxygen it desperately needed, and Nhan's corrupt system had been exposed. In the days that followed, Neo-Valora experienced something it hadn't known in generations: oxygen abundance. The artificial shortages created by Nhan's manipulations gave way to proper distribution across all districts. Hospital admission rates for oxygen deprivation dropped dramatically. The black market collapsed overnight as official prices returned to affordable levels. Lam recovered slowly, but steadily. Her exposure to the toxic air had further damaged her lungs, but with proper treatment and the improved oxygen supply, she began to regain her strength. 1 month after the events at the compression facility, Lemin stood on the balcony of his new apartment, watching the sunset through the haze of the atmospheric barrier. The toxic dust storm still raged beyond the city's protection. The dead zone still stretched to the horizon in every direction, but within Neo-Valora, people breathed easier. Dr. Yen had been appointed interim director of a revived Clean Air Institute, with Lemin leading the research division focused on developing his distributed purification technology. Lam, despite her health challenges, had begun training as a respiratory therapist, determined to help others with conditions similar to her own. The compression facility in the dead zone continued to operate, now under transparent authority oversight with citizen representatives involved in all decisions regarding oxygen distribution. Thatch, after a brief investigation, had joined the new administration as a technical advisor, his knowledge of the corrupt system proving valuable in dismantling its remaining elements. Hasingan awaited trial, his claims about the dying atmosphere being investigated by independent researchers. Preliminary findings suggested he had exaggerated the immediate crisis, but not fabricated it entirely. The global atmosphere was indeed degrading, just not at the catastrophic rate he had claimed to justify his control. As darkness fell, Lemin noticed a flicker of green among the plants on his balcony, one of the air-filtering flowers that had once been rare treasures in the underground bunkers. Now, they were being cultivated throughout the city, small symbols of hope amid the industrial air purifiers. A knock at the door announced Lam's arrival. She entered with Dr. Yen and Vin, their weekly gathering having become something of a tradition. The latest distribution reports, Vin announced, displaying figures on his portable screen. Oxygen reaching all districts at 95% efficiency. The outer sectors are finally receiving their fair share. And the new filtration prototypes? Lemin asked Dr. Yen. Promising, she replied. The miniaturized units are achieving 60% of the efficiency of the main facility. With refinement, we could begin deploying them to individual neighborhoods within months. Lam, still thin, but with more color in her cheeks than Lemin had seen in years, placed a small object on the table, a newer version of the catalyst device she designed. For the next generation of filters, she explained. Longer duration, higher efficiency. Dr. Yen and I have been working on it in the Institute's new lab. Lemin picked up the device, marveling at how something so small could represent such significant hope. The oxygen crisis wasn't solved, perhaps wouldn't be fully solved in their lifetime. But for the first time in generations, Neo-Valora was breathing together, facing its challenges collectively, rather than through artificial scarcity and control. Outside, the toxic winds still howled against the barriers. The dead zone still waited, a constant reminder of humanity's past arrogance and failures. But within the city, each breath came easier than the last, and each day brought new progress toward a future where air, the most basic necessity of life, would never again be weaponized against the vulnerable. As they planned and worked into the night, a distant warning siren sounded, another toxic sandstorm approaching from the east. But this time, no one in the room tensed or worried about oxygen supplies. This time, they simply continued their work, breathing freely in a city that finally did the same. Beyond the atmospheric barriers, through the toxic haze, a single light blinked from what had once been the financial district of the dead zone. A signal suggesting that Ngan's operation had not been the only secret hidden in the poisoned wasteland. Another challenge for another day, perhaps. But for now, for this moment, they had won the right to breathe.